afternoon and welcome to CEC Gurukul lecture. In continuation with the series on sociology of India, in today's lecture we are going to discuss the relationship between education and social change. To begin with, we will try to understand what is education, how education can lead to social change, and then it's a two-way relation. Social change taking place is also the result of education, whereas it can change the way in which education is imparted and learned. So let us start off by understanding what is education. So if we refer to John Dewey's definition of education, he defines it as the process by which knowledge is transferred to other people through stories, discussions, training or research. So basically when we read this definition, we kind of understand that education is sharing of knowledge. It is kind of sharing knowledge or understanding of a process, a phenomena, a social reality with a number of people. And therefore we kind of say in a common sense language, to educate someone is to increase the awareness or increase the information of the individuals towards certain situation. So education generally takes place under the guidance of teacher. Yes, it is sharing of information, but then there has to be a understanding of legitimate or correct knowledge, and therefore there is a hierarchy where those who have more experience, those who are more learned are kind of considered as educator, teachers, mentor, and it is under their supervision that knowledge is imparted. It can be learnt on its own, and specifically in a time where we are living in the age of technology, online education via various mode, education is possible. It is known as autodidactic learning, that is you yourself kind of become an sharer of learners of information. Education is a continuous process. It's a continuous reconstruction of experience and understanding. So it's not that once one's degree is completed or the going to schools and colleges is complete, education comes to an end. No, it is something which goes on systematically changing, and it implies that information about whatsoever it be regarding a period of history or about any particular institution or about society needs to be reconstructed within the time and space context. Education is not solely the basic academic concept that a student learns in a classroom. So it is not just classroom learning. Much of the time we learn outside the school, and that is matter of everyday practical living. So if we see the child's education, initially it is learned, many things of life is learned in the hidden curriculum through the parents, through the grandparents and relatives around. Many a time we have heard this phrase that he is not educated, has not gone to any school, but yet is speaking like a learned man or a woman. That education or the awareness of the particular society's context about certain information has been learned through experience, through living the life in social reality. So when we talk about classroom education plus education outside classroom, in sociology it is defined in technical terms as formal education and informal education. So formal education, as the term itself defines, is the learning of academic facts and concepts through a formal curriculum. So we have a curriculum which is prescribed by the state, which is accepted of a legitimate mode of imparting education to the students. So this is classroom learning, whether it be school or higher education. So from the emergence of these earlier Greek thinkers, scholars have examined topics through formalized method of learning. So the formalized method of learning is basically structured in a way which is that it tests your knowledge at a particular level, and then based on the performance in that level, one is promoted to the next level. So it is kind of constructed in the form of certain degrees which have been given terminology, and these degrees are also a reflection of the hierarchy in terms of people with higher degrees are considered to be more educated than those with the less, but it is only kind of formal. It's not necessarily to be correct in all settings. Formal education in contemporary society, the basic education is considered as a right. So we have right to education, where every child up to the age of 14 has the right provided by the state to be educated. It becomes the responsibility of the state to ensure that every citizen is educated. Now this becomes a formal education, that you need to know how to write your name, need to kind of learn the basic documents, and therefore this also goes into quantifying the status of the society through literacy rate. So the focus of formal education with curricular and testing is designed to ensure that students learn the facts and concepts that society believes are basic knowledge. So there is kind of certain accepted facts and figures about every society which are kind of considered as necessarily for everyone to be aware of, and therefore these goes into the curricular once the formal structure is designed. Now when we talk about formal, we need to understand the other form of education, which is informal education. Now informal education describes learning about cultural values, norms, expected behaviors by participating in a society. Now this informal education becomes culturally specific, because values, norms and expected behavior would differ from society to society. So it therefore becomes a part of the members who are kind of older or been part of the society before the individual takes on the role of imparting this information to the next generation. Informal learning occurs through both formal education system and at home or in cultural setting. So many of our own experiences that when we are in an informal setting, in a cultural setting, we teach our young ones certain manners, certain values. So it's informal. Now how does informal takes place in a formal setting? That is, every schools and higher education have curriculum designed on value education, on say certain cultural forms, on dance, singing. Therefore it is also learnt in a formal system. Now the informal education, our earliest learning experience, which I have already said, happens through parents, relatives and other. It is kind of considered as the process of socialization, where we are kind of taught the certain pattern of behavior which is very specific to a particular culture and even to family. Through informal education, we also learn about the dressing pattern, how to kind of dress differently for different occasion, how to perform regular life routines like even as everyday mundane things like shopping or preparing food, and also to keep ourselves and our body clean and hygiene. Now after understanding what is education, the next important thing is to understand the relationship between education and society. Why is education important? Why should we kind of bother whether the population is educated or not? For this, we try to understand the relation between education and society. Now, the educational system of any society is related to the total social system. Now, social system is a concept which has been given in by Talcott Parsons in his understanding of AGIL model. Now, according to Talcott Parsons, social system refers to an orderly arrangement an interrelationship of parts. So he was basically talking about the relationship of the part to the whole, and that is a system. Their parts are related to the whole and they all functions together to maintain the nitty-gritty of the system. So in the arrangement of a social system, every part has a fixed place and a definite role to play. So the goals and needs of the total social system gets reflected in the function it lays down for the educational system. And when we look into the details of educational system, we see it kind of performs an n number of role in terms of socialization, familiarity with the culture, awareness about the surrounding, awareness and information about what has happened in the past, futuristic analysis and planning. And therefore, the reflection of educational system in terms of its relationship with the structures of the society and the role it fulfills becomes significant. Education may perform a number of functions. It might perform the conservation and transmission of tradition that we just talked about. It also kind of helps in the transmission of customs of society from one generation to the next. It can have a progressive functioning of changing society, and at many a time it can also be dysfunctional. Now, have we understood why education is important? The next concept is social change. So, let us first understand these concepts, have clarity of this concept of education and social change, and then we will understand how the two have been effective in understanding the nature of social change in India. So, sociologists define social change as change in human interaction and relationship that transform cultural and social institutions. So, change is that there has been some amount of transformation. Now, when we look into the structures of the society, because society is a web of social relationship, so social change here basically implies that there is some change in the culture and structure of the society. What does this mean? This implies that there is about a change or a transformation in the pattern of relationship between the members of the society, and there is also a change in the relationship between individual and the way they are related to the different institutions like schools, college, market, state. So it's kind of a two-way relation. The society changes because there is some socio-political economic change taking place, and the other round, when economy changes or when the political system changes, there is a reflection of the changing interaction pattern among individuals. These changes occur over a period of time, so it's not spontaneous. It's not that it just happens over a night. It takes time, it's gradual, and often we see that they are changing, but all of it together, the previous does not disappear. So they kind of coexist. So if we try to understand the social change in, say, dressing pattern, and if we kind of say that there's a lot of westernization or moving towards the modern culture, we also find the persistence of traditional cultural dressing existing parallel to it. So these changes are understood in terms of changes taking place in the social process and social interaction and organization. Now, when we look into the understanding of education and social change, we see that the two are independent of each other. Scholars are of opinion that education may lead to social change or it may follow social change. So, changes in the educational system also bring about change in the society. So, if we go back to the traditional society, the educational system was generally through Gurukul system, and much of the privileged class or the upper caste and men had access to education, and therefore the outcome was that the literacy rate of women were quite low. So the reformers and other leaders advocated for education for the girl child. And why was this advocated? Because education of the girl child would bring about in change in the egalitarian nature of society. Then we came in with the colonial period, and then modern system of education with English as the medium of instructions. There was a dominance of Western literature, science, history, and the entire education was geared to the reproduction of the social system in the Western countries. If we look into the work of Kamath, who has worked on India in the Indian context on education and social change, he says there are four positions regarding the relationship between education and social change. First, education is for itself and it has nothing to do with social change. That is, it is at the level of individuals' acquirement of skills and knowledge, and it enables individuals to become better off or become mobile. However, it has no larger impact on society. The second position argues that education is determined completely by social factor and therefore play no role in changing society. The third, education is an autonomous or relatively autonomous factor and therefore does not induce social change. And the last, that is the fourth position, educational change and social change must take place simultaneously. So if we look into the course in which societies or the history of other society and India included, we see the fourth position becomes more significant, that education has kind of taken place, reformed, and a lot of changes in educational system has taken place, and that has led to social change. Now, in order to understand the relationship between education and social change, let us refer to some of the sociological work in it, that is, refer to the classical work and understand their argument about the relationship of the two. The most famous sociologists to have kind of talked about the relationship of the two is Emil Durkheim, who kind of considered the social functions of education. Durkheim believed that moral education was necessary for society to exist. Why? Because moral education provided the basis for society's solidarity that held society together. So he was more concerned about the collective order. He was more concerned about the integration of individual in society, and therefore he assigned an important role to education, that is, impart moral values in the individual. Durkheim, in his functionalist view of education, viewed socializing function of education as serving to promote social control and curb deviant behavior. So it was through education that people would become more morally upright, would kind of do what was kind of, the awareness was there in terms of the norms and values, the rules and regulations, and therefore deviating from the moral standard would be difficult. In terms of social change, Durkheim argued that not just one form of education is ideal, but there should be many forms of education. And when he talks about the functionalist view of education, he highlights two important functions of education in an advanced industrial society. And that is, he's saying that when change takes place from mechanical to organic solidarity, the focus is on education. It would enable the transition from one form to the other. So in advanced industrial society, the function of education is to transmit shared values of society and simultaneously teach the specialized skills for an economy based on a specialized division of labor. Durkheim explained that education was very crucial. And why was it crucial? Because it would enable the individuals to maintain a degree of homogeneity. So, if everybody is aware of the norms, values, the requirement of a society, then their opinion or the choice on any kind of issues or problem would be same, and therefore the degree of homogeneity would become essential for maintaining a collective life. The second sociologist is Karl Mannheim. Karl Mannheim, he explored the problem of social change and social progress in relations to education. He was basically writing on sociology of knowledge, how sociology of knowledge is important in order to understand the problems arising in the society. So, human thought, according to Mannheim, is a result of one's social setting, and therefore, in order to be able to make informed choice, in order to take part in decision making, to be able to make a choice, it was very important to be aware of one's social setting. And how is one aware of social setting? It is through education. So, the leaders of the nation also have an important role to play. Karl Mannheim argued that it is the teacher's role to educate the individual in a way which would enable them to understand the meaning of change. And therefore, all of us, all individuals are product of an upbringing culture through the institution of education. So, when we look into Durkheim and Mannheim, we see that the focus is on the functionalist approach. Now, when we look into the functionalist approach to education, they will be arguing about the functions. Now, it could play different functions. The number one is that it can ignore social change and serve as a conserver of tradition. So, those who argue for the conservation of traditions would say that it is important to educate individual, transmit what is permanently worthwhile, and a lot of understanding, lot of awareness and information about the past, about the cultural heritage, about how the young population should adapt themselves to maintain the nitty-gritty of the culture. And here the focus is actually to kind of maintain status quo. The second function is to act as cooperative force in social change. That is, education would favor the change taking place of the society in a positive direction. And similarly, the third function of education is to act as an agent of social change. So, when we try to understand education as conservers of tradition, it is the aim to preserve culture in whatever form it exists. One of its main goals is to make sure the social heritage will survive, and they play an important role in the preservation of culture and civilization. When we look into education as an instrument of social change, they kind of help us to control different cultural groups, reflect the values of those groups which support and control education, and here the role of teachers are highlighted. They play important role in imparting specific values, aspirations and attitude to the children. The next is to understand education from the conflict perspective. That is coming in from Karl Marx's theory of relationship between workers and capitalism. The conflict theory approach to education examines the way education institutions and hierarchy of degree contribute to the reproduction of hierarchies and inequalities in society. The conflict approach recognizes schooling as reflecting class, racial, gender stratification, and it tends to reproduce. So, schools are not meritocratic according to conflict approach. Individuals' talents and hard work do not necessarily grant success. And in the conflict approach, we also see the state as an ideological apparatus, where the state, ideological state apparatus given by Althusser, it is education, church, family, media, trade union, which are formally outside state control, which serves to transmit the values of the state to reproduce capitalist relations of production. So education is an instrument forced by the ruling class. So state becomes not a kind of imparting education, but it becomes a tool in the hand of the ruling class to serve and preserve their own interest, and therefore largely maintain the status quo in the existing economic and political power structure. Now, when we look into the existing power structure, we also refer to P.D. Bourdieu's work, where he is giving us the cultural capital. So, the accumulation of cultural knowledge in the form of cultural taste, knowledge, pattern of speech, clothing, proper etiquette. So, these are all non-material culture, which becomes an investment to increase knowledge. And if we look into the way in which members of the upper and middle classes have more cultural capital than members of lower class status, and therefore they can pass it on to their children from time they are toddler. As a result, the education system maintains a cycle. It becomes a vicious cycle, which is kind of reproducing inequality and reproducing the dominant cultural values, which are kind of considered as more rewarding than the other. With this, we can look into some of the references which will help us to understand the relation between education and social change. The first reading is Brookover W.B., Sociology of Education, a definition published in American Sociological Review. This next is Doda-Zay, Introducing Sociology, Ethiopia, Public Health, and the third is The Uncomfortable Relation of Sociology of Education in Hansen D.A. Jerset edited volume on Education, Sociological Perspective. These readings will give us a good understanding of the relationship between education and social change. With this, I come to an end of today's lecture. Thank you.